Hello everyone. I am Horror Horizon, and I'm here to help you today. I know many of you use this video to fall asleep, so before we begin, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, let me know in the comments where you're from and what time you're watching right now. Get comfortable, relax, and let's dive into a story that might just keep you awake tonight. If you have any horror stories that have happened to you, please email us. It was late autumn, and the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest were cloaked in a thick, eerie mist. The trees, ancient and towering, seemed to close in around me as I hiked deeper into the wilderness. I had planned this solo camping trip for months, eager to disconnect from the chaos of modern life and reconnect with nature. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, an unsettling feeling began to creep over me. I set up camp in a small clearing, surrounded by towering pines and the faint sound of a nearby stream. The air was crisp, and the forest was alive with the usual nighttime symphony of crickets and rustling leaves. I cooked a simple meal over my portable stove, the warmth of the fire providing a small comfort against the encroaching darkness. As I zipped myself into my tent, I felt a strange unease, as though I was being watched. I brushed it off as nerves. After all, I was alone in the middle of nowhere. The first night passed without incident, but on the second night, everything changed. I had just drifted off to sleep when I was jolted awake by the sound of footsteps. At first, I thought it was an animal, a deer or maybe a raccoon, but the steps were too deliberate, too rhythmic. They circled my tent slowly, crunching leaves and snapping twigs underfoot. My heart pounded as I lay frozen in my sleeping bag, straining to listen. The footsteps stopped just outside my tent. I held my breath, my mind racing. Was it a bear? A mountain lion? I reached for my flashlight, my hands trembling, and slowly unzipped the tent flap just enough to peek outside. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating the trees and underbrush. At first, I saw nothing. Then, as I scanned the tree line, my blood ran cold. A tall, shadowy figure stood about 20 feet away, partially obscured by the trees. It was humanoid but unnaturally thin, with long limbs that seemed to blend into the darkness. Its face was featureless, just a void where eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. It didn't move or make a sound, it just stood there, staring directly at me. I felt a wave of primal fear wash over me, the kind of fear that bypasses logic and reason and screams at you to run. I zipped the tent flap shut and grabbed my phone, but there was no signal. The footsteps started again, this time closer, circling the tent like a predator sizing up its prey. I clutched my knife, my mind racing through every possible scenario. Should I stay in the tent? Should I make a run for it? The footsteps stopped once more, and the forest fell silent. I waited for what felt like hours, too terrified to move, until exhaustion finally pulled me into a fitful sleep. When I woke the next morning, the forest was eerily quiet. The usual sounds of birds and rustling leaves were absent, replaced by an oppressive silence. I packed up my gear as quickly as I could, my eyes darting to the tree line every few seconds. The figure was gone, but the feeling of being watched lingered. As I hiked back to my car, I couldn't shake the sense that something was following me. Twice, I turned around, convinced I would see the figure again, but the forest was empty. When I finally reached the trailhead, I felt a wave of relief. I drove straight to the nearest ranger station and reported what had happened. The ranger listened intently, his expression growing more serious as I described the figure. "You're not the first person to report something like this," he said. "There have been other hikers who've seen a tall, shadowy figure in these woods. Some say it's a spirit, others think it's something else entirely. Whatever it is, it's been around for a long time. Years have passed since that night, but I still think about it often. I've spoken to other hikers who've had similar experiences in the same area, and their stories are eerily consistent, a tall, silent figure that watches from the shadows, never approaching but always present. Some believe it's a guardian spirit, protecting the forest from intruders. Others think it's something far more sinister. I've never gone back to those woods, and I doubt I ever will. The memory of that featureless face, those long, unnatural limbs, and the oppressive silence of the forest still haunts me. It's a reminder that there are places in this world where the line between reality and the unknown blurs, and where the wilderness holds secrets that are better left undisturbed." It was the summer of 2015, and a group of 4 friends, Mark, Sarah, Jake, and Emily, had embarked on a week-long backpacking trip through the remote wilderness of northern Canada. The area was known for its untouched beauty, with sprawling forests, crystal-clear lakes, and rugged terrain. But it was also vast and isolated, with no cell service and few signs of human presence. The group was experienced and well-prepared, but nothing could have prepared them for what they were about to encounter. On the fourth day of their trek, the group found themselves deep in the woods, miles from the nearest trail. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the forest floor. They were exhausted, their legs aching from hours of hiking, and the prospect of setting up camp in the dark was unappealing. That's when they stumbled upon it, a small, dilapidated cabin nestled in a clearing. The cabin looked like it had been abandoned for decades. Its wooden walls were weathered and warped, the roof sagging under the weight of time. The windows were broken, and the door hung crookedly on its hinges. Despite its ominous appearance, the group was relieved. A cabin, even a rundown one, was better than sleeping on the cold, hard ground. "This is perfect," Mark said, dropping his backpack. "We can stay here for the night and get an early start tomorrow." The others agreed, though Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air around the cabin felt heavy, and the forest was unnaturally quiet. Still, she kept her concerns to herself, not wanting to alarm the group. The interior of the cabin was even more unsettling. The floor was covered in a thick layer of dust, and the walls were lined with strange carvings, crude symbols and jagged lines that seemed to form no recognizable pattern. A foul smell permeated the air, like rotting meat or something long dead. In one corner, a rickety staircase led down to a basement, its door slightly ajar. "What do you think happened here?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "No idea," Jake replied, "but I'm not going down there to find out." The group decided to set up their sleeping bags in the main room, as far from the basement door as possible. As they settled in, the sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the cabin into darkness. They lit a few lanterns, but the flickering light only deepened the shadows, making the carvings on the walls seem to shift and move. It started with a faint knocking sound, barely audible at first. The group froze, their eyes darting toward the door. The knocking grew louder, more insistent, as if someone, or something, was trying to get in. "Is someone out there?" Mark called, his voice trembling. There was no response, only the relentless knocking. Then, the cabin began to shake. The walls groaned, and the floorboards creaked under the strain. The lanterns flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. "We need to get out of here," Sarah screamed. The group scrambled to gather their things, but the shaking grew more violent. The carvings on the walls seemed to glow faintly, and the foul smell intensified, making it hard to breathe. Jake grabbed his flashlight and shone it toward the basement door. The beam of light revealed something moving in the darkness, a shadowy figure, hunched and grotesque, crawling up the stairs. "Go. Now," Jake shouted. The group bolted out of the cabin, not stopping to look back. They ran blindly through the forest, branches whipping at their faces and roots tripping their feet. The sound of the knocking followed them, echoing through the trees, until they finally reached the edge of the clearing. When they turned around, the cabin was gone. The clearing was empty, nothing but tall grass and scattered trees where the structure had stood moments before. The group stood in stunned silence, their minds struggling to process what had just happened. Where did it go?" Emily whispered. No one had an answer. They spent the rest of the night huddled together in the forest, too afraid to sleep. The next morning, they retraced their steps, searching for any sign of the cabin. But there was nothing, no footprints, no broken branches, no evidence that the cabin had ever existed. When the group finally made it back to civilization, they reported their experience to the local authorities. The rangers were skeptical but admitted that strange things had been reported in that area before: disappearances, unexplained lights, and sightings of shadowy figures. Some locals claimed the woods were haunted, while others believed the area was a hotspot for paranormal activity. To this day, the group has no explanation for what they experienced. The cabin, the carvings, the knocking, and the shadowy figure remain a mystery, a terrifying reminder of how little we truly understand about the world around us. None of them have returned to those woods, and they all carry the memory of that night like a dark secret, a story they only tell in hushed tones. The Appalachian Mountains are known for their rugged beauty, dense forests, and rich folklore. But for one hunter, a routine trip into the wilderness turned into a nightmare he would never forget. It was late October, the air crisp and filled with the scent of fallen leaves. The hunter, a seasoned outdoorsman named Tom, had spent years exploring these woods, tracking deer and enjoying the solitude of nature. But this trip would be different. Tom had set out before dawn, his rifle slung over his shoulder and a backpack filled with supplies. The forest was quiet, the only sounds the crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional call of a distant bird. By midday, he had hiked deep into the mountains, far from any trails or signs of human activity. He found a good spot to set up his blind, a small clearing surrounded by tall trees, and settled in to wait for deer. Hours passed, and the forest remained eerily still. Tom began to feel uneasy, though he couldn't pinpoint why. The usual sounds of wildlife, the chirping of birds, the rustling of squirrels, were absent, replaced by an oppressive silence. He shook off the feeling, attributing it to the changing weather or his own fatigue. Then, just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, he heard it. At first, it was faint, a distant wail that echoed through the trees. Tom froze, his heart pounding. The sound grew louder, more piercing, until it filled the forest. It was unlike anything he had ever heard, a blood-curdling scream that sounded almost human but was distorted, unnatural. It seemed to come from every direction at once, bouncing off the trees and reverberating in his chest. Tom's instincts screamed at him to run, but his curiosity got the better of him. He grabbed his rifle and flashlight, following the sound deeper into the woods. The screams continued, growing more frantic, more desperate. They seemed to move, always just out of reach, as if whatever was making them was leading him somewhere. After what felt like an eternity, Tom emerged into a small clearing. The screams stopped abruptly, leaving a deafening silence in their wake. The clearing was unlike anything he had ever seen. The ground was scorched, a perfect circle of blackened earth surrounded by untouched grass and trees. The air smelled of sulfur, sharp and acrid, making his eyes water. In the center of the clearing was a large, charred tree stump, its surface covered in strange symbols carved deep into the wood. The symbols were unlike anything Tom had ever seen, angular and jagged, forming no recognizable pattern. He approached cautiously, his flashlight beam trembling as it swept over the scene. That's when he noticed the bones. Scattered around the stump were animal bones, some fresh and others bleached white by the sun. They were arranged in a deliberate pattern, forming a circle around the stump. Tom's stomach churned as he realized what he was looking at. This wasn't a natural phenomenon, it was a ritual site. Before Tom could process what he was seeing, the screams started again, louder and closer than before. This time, they were accompanied by a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from the ground itself. The air grew colder, and the flashlight flickered, its beam growing dim. Tom didn't wait to see what would happen next. He turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush as the screams followed him. Branches clawed at his face and arms, but he didn't stop, driven by sheer terror. The forest seemed to close in around him, the trees twisting and shifting as if alive. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs gave out, collapsing in a heap on the forest floor. When he finally caught his breath, he realized the screams had stopped. The forest was silent once more, the only sound the pounding of his own heart. He had no idea where he was or how far he had run, but he knew he had to get out of there. It took Tom hours to find his way back to his truck. When he finally emerged from the woods, he was covered in scratches and bruises, his clothes torn and his face pale with fear. He drove straight to the nearest town, where he reported what had happened to the local authorities. The sheriff listened patiently but seemed skeptical, dismissing the screams as the call of a mountain lion or bobcat. But Tom knew better. He had spent years in these woods and knew the sounds of every animal that lived there. What he had heard was no animal, it was something else, something unnatural. In the weeks that followed, Tom learned that other hunters and hikers had reported strange occurrences in the same area, unexplained screams, sightings of shadowy figures, and even disappearances. Some locals claimed the mountains were haunted, while others spoke of ancient rituals and curses. Tom never returned to those woods. The memory of the screams, the charred clearing, and the strange symbols haunted him, a reminder that there are places in this world where the line between reality and the unknown blurs. The wilderness, for all its beauty, can also be a place of profound and inexplicable terror. Thank you so much for watching. If this story sent chills down your spine or made you believe in the unseen, Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Let us know in the comments, do you believe in spirits, or do you think there's a logical explanation for these hauntings? Make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our next spine-tingling story. Until next time, stay curious, stay brave, and remember, sometimes, the past never truly stays buried. Thanks for being part of our journey. See you in the next video.